Day 6, afternoon. The smell is what hit me first. Stale sweat, mildew, something acrid. I think it's fear. I'm smelling fear. The hallway was dimly lit, buzzing with the sounds of those awful fluorescent lights. A man brushed past me, making no eye contact, as far as I could tell. Why is he even wearing mirrored sunglasses indoors? He held a wooden baton like it meant something. I just kept walking. They told me it was an experiment, that everyone here was a volunteer, that everything was under control, and then I saw them. Oh my God, what happened here? Escaped from my mouth. I saw the prisoners being marched to go to the men's room, bags over their heads, feet shackled together as they walked in a line, hands on the shoulders of the prisoner ahead of them. I was getting sick to my stomach, physically ill. I said, I can't watch this. My stomach turned, but no one else was having the same problem. Am I crazy? Philip stood beside me, smiling, proud. He's explaining the structure, the progression, the guards' ingenuity. He gestured toward one cell, voice rising with something like, "Oh, it's admiration." I didn't hear the words. All I could see were the bruises on the young man's arms, the outline of shame etched into his posture. Stop this, I said. Philip blinked. What do you mean? This is wrong. This isn't science. It took a moment, maybe more than a moment, for the mask to fall. For the psychologist to remember that he was not, in fact, a prison warden. That these were not inmates or guards, but college-aged volunteers. This overseer was not observing cruelty. He was complicit in it. And what's worse is that the experiment worked on him. Someone who was never even meant to be a participant. Welcome to Norm Studios, where we paint the worst possible picture of volunteering. I'm Lisa, and I'm a writer. I have a degree in anthropology, and I'm fascinated by real-life Twilight Zone stories. The metal door clanged shut, the echo stretching unnaturally down the dimly lit corridor. Inside the barren cell, a young man in a smudged, ill-fitting uniform stared at the concrete floor, his breath shallow. He had only been there a few days. Wait, had it been days? Time was slipping and the walls were pressing in. Outside, the guards paced, their polished boots striking the tile in rhythmic precision. One of them, a tall man with a smirk that never quite reached his eyes, rapped the baton against the bars. "Prisoner 819, he called. His voice was too loud for the small space. "Get up." The prisoner flinched but obeyed. That was the rule now. Obey. The first day this had been a game. A psychological study. They were volunteers, students playing roles. But today, whatever day it was, everyone knew they were no longer students. No longer volunteers playing roles. This experiment had become real, and obedience was the first rule in this new reality. The prison warden made his first appearance of the day, and the prisoners knew that he brought no relief with him. Proud of the progress being made, he walked around with his head held high, hands clasped behind his back like a real-life general inspecting his troops. Today was the day the outsiders came, to look at his creation and to applaud the work of his hands. The outsiders, the one who cut through the noise. Oh my God, what happened here? How can you see what I saw and not care about the suffering? The voice that pierced through the veil and tore it. As Phil, the prison warden and the leader of the study, later said, there was zero time for reflection. We had to feed the prisoners 3 meals a day, deal with the prisoner breakdowns, deal with their parents, run a parole board. By the 3rd day, I was sleeping in my office. I had become the superintendent of the Stanford County Jail. That was who I was. I wasn't a researcher at all. He had come to unintentionally play a role in the experiment that he had created, designed, and then joined without even realizing it. Now, for these stories, I usually have to do more work to create the historically based, narrative-driven stories in the first parts of these videos, but this needed very little creation. This actually did happen, like my other stories, but with this, there are very good records of it, so let's add a few more details. In August 1971, a study meant to explore the psychology of imprisonment spiraled into something far darker than its creators had anticipated. Conducted by psychologist Philip Zimbardo at Stanford University, the experiment placed 24 students into a simulated prison environment. Half of them were guards, the other half prisoners, and the goal was to observe how people adapted to roles of power and subjugation. It took less than 48 hours for the transformation to begin. The guards, given no strict rules beyond maintaining order, quickly embraced their authority. They devised punishments, forced prisoners to do push-ups, and humiliated them in subtle and insidious ways, making them refer to each other by numbers instead of names, stripping them of individuality. By the third day, the abuse had escalated. Sleep deprivation, solitary confinement, psychological torment. Let me remind you, this is 3 days into an experiment that college students volunteered for. Sleep deprivation, solitary confinement, and psychological torment within 72 hours. But it wasn't all natural. As one guard said, what came over me was not an accident. It was planned. I set out with a definite plan in mind to try and force the action, for something to happen so that the researchers would have something to work with. I was kind of running my own experiment in there by saying, how far can I push these things, and how much abuse will these people take before they say, knock it off? But the other guards didn't stop me. They seemed to join in. They were taking my lead. Not a single guard said, I don't think we should do this. That is an actual quote. And the prisoners, they broke. Some rebelled, shouting at their captors until their voices cracked. Others withdrew, curling into themselves, whispering apologies for crimes they never created. One suffered a breakdown so severe that he had to be released. And no one stopped it. Zimbardo himself, playing the role of the prison superintendent, did not intervene. His objectivity dissolved in the haze of the experiment. Remember, within days. It took a visiting psychologist, an outsider, and an argument for Zimbardo to see what the prison experiment had become, a prison. With people given numbers, being led around with bags over their heads so they couldn't see, being yelled at and cursed at as they were chained together in order to use the restroom, the experiment had collapsed in on itself. It ceased to be an experiment with an objective outside observer, and all it took was 6 days. And what it needed was one outside visit for the entire thing to be shut down. And here are my thoughts on this. It's incredibly upsetting. Most papers and stories focus on the implications it holds, normal people quickly becoming monsters, and in prisons and other times where someone might be in captivity. And that's all true and should definitely be looked at. But the part that gets me personally is the lead researcher. He didn't realize he had joined the experiment. It gives me this uneasy feeling and this reminder that it's easy to look at situations and assume you have it under control. For example, within an organization, business or otherwise. Yeah, the finances are being run a little bit goofy, but that's the leadership's issue. But people are overstepping their roles as leaders, but that's in a different department. That one micromanager has turned into a micromanipulator, and yeah, that's kind of awkward, but maybe I'm just seeing something wrong. Yeah, there are a few threats and we're not allowed to talk to each other, and yeah, maybe the options are being slowly stripped away so that people feel like they can leave, but listen, the most third party or observant people can become people who are complicit to the harm, all while convincing themselves that they're not the ones who are even involved. In some ways, it's worse than playing the role, or maybe not worse, but at least scarier. It's being so convinced that you aren't a part of it that you have now become the role itself. And that is awful. But this story itself does get worse. I think a common question that people have is, why didn't the volunteers leave? And we all know the traditional answers. They had given up to such a point where they didn't realize they had a choice. The experiment became too real for them, and they couldn't see outside of it. Their minds had created a prison while they were in this prison, and they stayed there. The problem with this story is that one of them actually did see outside of it, and they did want to leave. As Richard Yacco, one of the prisoners, later said, "When I asked them, Zimbardo's team, what I could do if I wanted to quit, I was told, you can't quit. You agreed to be here for the full experiment." And that made me feel like a prisoner at that point. I realized I had made a commitment to something that I now could not change. I had made myself a prisoner.